I was brushing hay off Daisy's mane when I heard a blood-curdling scream that didn't sound like anything on four legs. I ran around the paddock thinking maybe a coyote had slipped through the fence again, but what I found instead was a woman in yoga pants clutching her ankle and screeching into her phone. Behind her, my most docile horse looked utterly confused, like he'd just seen a tornado made of entitlement. I hadn't seen her before, but I knew her type instantly. The kind that believes every inch of land is public if it has flowers, every animal is pettable if it's cute, and every injury is a lawsuit if it means getting attention. She had trespassed through 3 locked gates and past 2 large no trespassing signs just to take a selfie with my horses, and now she was screaming for an ambulance like we were on the set of some reality courtroom drama. What I didn't know then was this wasn't just some one-off stunt. This was the opening act in a circus of delusion, lies, and legal threats that would nearly cost me my ranch. The gate had clearly been forced open, the lock cracked like someone had taken a rock to it in a hurry. One of the rails was bent downward, and there were fresh scuff marks on the ground where she'd obviously tripped while trying to either sneak out or stage her fall. Daisy, bless her heart, stood near the far end of the paddock, looking nervous and twitchy. She was the calmest horse on the ranch, the kind kids learn on. If this woman had somehow gotten her that worked up, she had to have done something incredibly stupid. I looked around and spotted the woman again trying to prop herself up while still filming. Her phone was angled just right to get her in the frame, crumpled in the dirt with my horse in the background. She was actually trying to make this go viral. I walked up cautiously and asked if she was okay. She looked up and, to my surprise, the tears vanished instantly. She narrowed her eyes and snarled, "Are you the owner here? That horse attacked me. I'm going to sue you into the ground." The gall it took to say that while standing on my land with a broken gate behind her had me stunned. I pointed to the fence. "You broke in, ma'am. There are warning signs everywhere. And that horse didn't attack you. You startled her. She's never hurt anyone." Her voice shot up an octave. "I was just admiring them. The gate was open. That's on you. My ankle might be broken. I should call animal control." I tried to keep calm, told her I was calling EMS for her safety, but that she needed to stay put. She huffed, called me a redneck, and said she had a lawyer who would eat me for breakfast. That's when I knew this wasn't a fluke encounter. This was going to be a storm. EMS came and took her away after checking her over. She refused treatment on-site but insisted on being transported for a full evaluation. Meanwhile, the sheriff's deputy who came along asked if I had security footage. I nearly hugged him. I brought him inside to the office and pulled up the live feed from earlier that morning. There she was, climbing over the side fence near the creek bed. She slipped, swore loudly, then marched toward the barn while talking into her phone. She reached out to pet Daisy, who sidestepped nervously. Instead of backing off, the woman stepped in closer with her arms raised like she was on a stage. Daisy gave a small buck out of fear, not aggression. The woman shrieked and flopped dramatically to the ground. I turned to the deputy. "That's her version of being attacked." He shook his head and said, "This is going to be interesting." I thought that was the end of it. I'd send over the footage, she'd get a warning, maybe a fine. Case closed. But 3 days later, a thick yellow envelope arrived at my door with the words "legal correspondence" on the front. Inside was a letter from a law firm in town representing Karen Rosenbaum. It stated she had suffered significant emotional and physical damages due to negligence on my part, and that she would be seeking compensation. I sat down, stunned. She actually did it. She filed a lawsuit against me for getting hurt while trespassing. I called my attorney, Dennis, and explained everything. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "This isn't about money. This sounds like someone trying to make a name for themselves, or stir up drama for clout. Either way, we'll fight it. But brace yourself. It's going to get ugly." Karen didn't stop there. She filed a formal complaint with the HOA, even though my land isn't governed by them. That didn't matter to her. She showed up at their next meeting, told a dramatic story about being lured onto the property by hearing a horse in distress, and claimed she was a lifelong animal lover just trying to help. She even brought a fake vet bill and wore an ankle brace for extra effect. The HOA board, especially the one lady who never liked the way I kept my barn painted red, lapped it up. They called me a liability to the neighborhood and said they'd have to look into new rules for livestock bordering HOA communities. I wasn't even in their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop them from writing letters. One even said they might recommend I be removed from the town's volunteer fire committee if I didn't resolve the matter quickly. I realized then this wasn't just about Karen. This was a power play. I was being used as an example, and Karen was the perfect puppet for it. Her injury was now a crusade. Her crusade was now a neighborhood cause. The cherry on top came a week later when I got a notice from Animal Control. An anonymous tip had been submitted claiming that my horses were being mistreated and kept in unsafe conditions. An officer would be stopping by for a welfare check. I laughed out loud when I read it. It was so obviously Karen. Still, I made sure everything was spotless. Not that I needed to change anything. My horses are treated like royalty. When the officer came by, he found Daisy and the others munching hay in a sunny, spotless paddock. The barn was clean, vet records updated, feed logs printed and signed. He smiled, nodded, and said, "We get calls like this all the time. Usually from the same people. You're fine here. I'm filing this as baseless." But I couldn't relax. Karen had proven she wouldn't stop. And the worst part was, she was still twisting the truth publicly. Her social media was full of posts about her injury, the cruel rancher who didn't care, and even worse, photos of my horses taken from God knows where. People were starting to believe her. That's when I knew I had to prepare for more than just clearing my name. I had to fight for it. Because this wasn't just about a horse selfie gone wrong anymore. This was about someone trying to trample everything I'd built. And I was done letting her set foot on my land, physically or legally, ever again. It had been just over a week since the incident, and already the atmosphere in the neighborhood had shifted. People who used to wave from across the road now avoided eye contact. Even folks I'd helped during storms or lent hay to in emergencies seemed suddenly unsure whether to be friendly or distant. Karen's story was spreading like wildfire, not just through whispers, but through curated social media posts and dramatic reenactments she filmed in her backyard with a garden rake pretending to be a crutch. She'd even gone so far as to record a teary-eyed video in front of the HOA clubhouse claiming she'd suffered life-changing trauma after trying to rescue a trapped foal. Of course, there was no foal, and there was no rescue, only her trespassing, startling my horses, and toppling herself into my paddock like it was an open audition for a courtroom soap opera. My attorney Dennis called me with updates almost daily. He was increasingly irritated but also slightly amused. Apparently, Karen had switched lawyers twice in a week because neither of them was moving fast enough for her taste. The new one was known around town for taking on any case if it meant TV time, and rumor had it he once tried to sue a lemonade stand for causing indigestion. That might have given most people confidence, but I knew better than to laugh it off. Even a flimsy lawsuit can drain a man dry if it drags out long enough, and Karen was clearly invested in making my life miserable. That week, I got an invite, or more accurately, a notice, to attend the upcoming HOA meeting. Now, again, I wasn't technically under HOA jurisdiction. My land was grandfathered in before the community's expansion and didn't fall under their covenants. But that hadn't stopped them from trying to meddle in my affairs before, and this time they had a more personal motivation. Karen had friends on the board. That much was now clear. One of them, a woman named Trish with a permanent scowl and a voice that sounded like a smoke alarm with a superiority complex, had long wanted me to modernize the look of my barn and complained that my horses smelled up the wind. She and Karen were made for each other. Entitlement personified, only now they were trying to play sheriff. The meeting took place in the HOA clubhouse, where bored retirees and overzealous rule enforcers gathered monthly to complain about lawn heights and fence colors. When I walked in, all eyes turned toward me like I was an outlaw walking into an old saloon. Karen was seated front and center with a faux silk scarf wrapped around her neck like she'd survived a horse stampede. She nodded at me with that smug confidence only someone who truly believed their own lies could wear. Her ankle brace was gone this time, but she sat gingerly, just enough to maintain the performance. The president, an elderly man named Clarence who usually slept through these meetings, called things to order. Karen stood up and asked to address the room. Her speech was like watching community theater on opening night, breathy, overly emotive, and about as subtle as a fire alarm. She recounted how she was walking along the border path when she heard distress cries from a baby animal, then heroically entered my property only to be ambushed by a wild stallion. The audience gasped, especially at the word ambushed. Someone actually asked if I kept Mustangs. I didn't even flinch. I waited until she finished, then politely asked to present evidence. Clarence waved his hand half-heartedly, and I wheeled in a cart with a monitor and hit play on the surveillance footage. The room went dead silent. There was Karen, clear as day, hopping the fence in designer sneakers, looking around like she was casing the joint, and then approaching Daisy with her phone already recording. She waved, tried to touch Daisy's mane, and when the horse backed away, she stepped closer until Daisy startled and kicked, not at her, but the ground near her. Karen screamed, tripped over her own feet, and landed on her side in the dirt. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't even particularly dramatic, at least until she started flailing like she'd been tackled. The footage ended and I looked around the room. No one spoke. Trish cleared her throat and muttered something about editing. Karen, red in the face, claimed the video was doctored and that it didn't show the full story. She stuck to the trapped foal narrative. One man finally raised his hand and said, "There was no foal in that video. Just you trespassing." That was the first moment I saw Karen falter. Her mask didn't slip all the way, but a hairline crack appeared. Still, the board wouldn't let it go. Trish insisted on forming a neighborhood safety committee to ensure that livestock adjacent to public trails were better contained. It was a thinly veiled attempt to harass me. Dennis later told me it had no legal weight, but it was clear this was going to become a PR war, not just a legal one. 2 days after the meeting, I woke up to find my tack room unlocked and my best saddle missing. Nothing else was touched, and there was no sign of forced entry. That meant someone had either stolen a key or found a way to pick the lock. I filed a police report, but without cameras in that specific shed, there wasn't much to go on. Still, I had my suspicions. Karen's lawsuit claimed I was negligent in securing my property. If something went missing now, it could be used to prove that point. It was all too convenient. Then came the animal control inspection. A young woman showed up unannounced with a clipboard and 2 staffers. She said they'd received a tip about malnourished horses and unsanitary conditions. I nodded, showed her around, let her inspect every corner of the barn, and stood silently while she made note. By the end of the walkthrough, she turned to me and said, "Honestly, this is the cleanest setup I've seen this month. Your animals are well fed, exercised, and clearly healthy. I'll file the report as unfounded." I asked who filed the complaint. She smiled sadly and said, "It was anonymous, but you probably already know." And I did. It wasn't just about horses anymore. Karen had made this personal. Every inch of my land now felt like it had eyes watching it. I started installing more cameras, locked up every gate with coded pads, and even put up new signs at every entrance. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Karen might have thought she was clever, but what she didn't realize was that I wasn't some passive rancher waiting to get steamrolled. I knew how to handle wild animals. And at this point, Karen was just another one, cornered and lashing out. That night, I reviewed more footage just in case. And there it was. A clip from 3 nights earlier, just past dusk, showing a blurry figure near the tack shed. The person was short, had a messy bun, and wore a hoodie. In the light of the motion sensor, the shape looked familiar. Too familiar. They fumbled with the lock, opened the shed, then walked out with something large slung over their shoulder. I couldn't see the face, but my gut knew. It was Karen. Or someone working with her. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. If she wanted war, I was going to show her how a rancher fights back, with facts, footage, and fury. And I wasn't going to let her control the story any longer. By the third week, it felt like my ranch had become ground zero for a personal vendetta wrapped in absurd legal theatrics. Karen's lawsuit wasn't just lingering anymore, it was gaining traction in all the wrong places. She'd now added a claim for emotional damages, citing that the incident had caused her to develop anxiety around large mammals and rustic environments. Never mind that her Instagram showed her petting alpacas at a petting zoo last weekend while wearing a sun hat and using a TikTok filter that made her eyes look like cartoon moons. Her entire case was stitched together from delusion, drama, and whatever half-truths she could dress up to look like facts. And yet, somehow, it was being taken seriously enough to move forward in court. Dennis, my attorney, told me we needed to start preparing as if it were going to trial. He also recommended getting a formal statement from a third-party veterinarian, not just my usual one, who might be seen as biased, but an expert with no ties to me or my operation. So I reached out to Dr. Lena Mendez, a respected large animal vet from a nearby county who had a reputation for calling things as she saw them. She visited the ranch on a cool Thursday morning, clipboard in hand, sharp eyes scanning everything from the feeding troughs to the medical logs. She asked the right questions, watched the horses move, checked for signs of injury or neglect, and finally turned to me and said, "Whoever accused you of mistreating these animals doesn't know horses. Or they know exactly what they're doing and just want to cause damage." Dr. Mendez's official report didn't just back me up, it shredded every line in Karen's complaint. It highlighted the spotless condition of the stalls, the balanced nutrition the horses received, and the extensive documentation of each animal's health and vaccinations. She even noted that Daisy, the horse Karen claimed had attacked her, was one of the calmest mares she'd ever examined. The report concluded that no animal on the property posed a threat to humans under normal, non-trespassing circumstances. It was exactly the ammunition we needed. Dennis was thrilled and started preparing to submit it as evidence, along with the footage, police reports, and HOA meeting transcripts. But as if on cue, Karen shifted her strategy. Apparently, someone on social media had pointed out that physical injuries were harder to prove than psychological ones, and suddenly she was singing a different tune. In her next video, shot from her living room with sad piano music playing softly in the background, she spoke tearfully about how the event had shattered her confidence, left her unable to walk by horse farms without panic attacks, and triggered repressed trauma from a childhood pony ride gone wrong. I nearly spit out my coffee when I heard that line. Not because I didn't believe people could have trauma, but because this woman had spent the last year tagging herself in every outdoor animal-themed event within driving distance, smiling ear to ear like she was auditioning for a calendar cover. Still, perception was powerful, and she was starting to gain sympathy online. One of her posts was picked up by a local blogger who ran with the headline, "Brave Woman Battles Rancher After Alleged Horse Attack." It was the kind of story that got clicks, dramatic, one-sided, and completely divorced from the fact. I tried reaching out to the blog for a correction, sent them the surveillance footage, the police report, and Dr. Mendez's findings, but they never responded. They didn't want the truth. They wanted drama. Karen was spoon-feeding it to them by the gallon. Then came the deposition. It was a critical turning point. Karen had to testify under oath, on camera, with lawyers present. Dennis and I sat on one side of the conference table, while Karen and her legal pit bull, an overconfident man named Marshall Greaves, sat on the other. From the moment it began, Karen was playing to the imaginary jury in her head. She dabbed her eyes, spoke in a breathy whisper, and exaggerated every detail. She claimed I had lured her in with a rustic fence line that looked like public access. She said she heard an animal in distress and feared for its safety, even though the footage clearly showed her pausing to apply lipstick before climbing the fence. She even described Daisy as a raging beast with wild eyes and flared nostrils. Dennis and I just looked at each other in disbelief. Then came our turn. Dennis calmly asked if she was aware of the no trespassing signs. She said she didn't see them. Dennis pulled out photos of the signs, big, red, bold letters placed at eye level. She blinked, hesitated, and said they must have been obstructed by foliage. He then asked her if she had any history around horses. She smiled proudly and said she'd grown up around them. He followed that up by asking if she recognized her own Instagram post from a week before the incident, showing her posing with a miniature donkey at a county fair. She admitted it was hers. And the caption, "Future Horse Whisperer," was also hers? She hesitated, then nodded. It went downhill from there. Dennis played a clip from her TikTok that was posted 3 days after the incident, the same day she claimed she was bedridden and emotionally shattered. In it, she was doing a trending dance in her backyard, with no brace on her ankle, smiling and laughing. The judge assigned to review the deposition footage would later comment that the contrast between her claims and her posts cast significant doubt on the credibility of her statements. The final nail came when we asked about her statement saying she had been invited onto the property by the layout. Dennis paused and repeated it slowly, as if making sure he'd read it right. The layout. Karen doubled down, saying the open design of the fencing and the inviting look of the barn made it feel like an open-air exhibit. Dennis responded with one line that would echo through every legal filing for the rest of the case. "So your claim is that the aesthetic of the property overrode your legal awareness of trespassing?" Karen blinked. Marshall tried to object, but it was too late. The absurdity had landed. After the deposition, even Dennis looked stunned. He leaned over and said, "I've seen people tank their own case before, but this might be a new record." The transcript was sent to the court, and a new hearing was scheduled to determine whether the suit would be allowed to proceed or be dismissed entirely. But Karen, perhaps sensing her case unraveling, did what many people do when cornered: she escalated. The very next day, I received another letter, this time claiming that Karen's daughter had suffered psychological trauma from the incident. The problem was, no child was ever present during the trespassing. None had been seen in the footage, and none were mentioned in her original statements. But now, apparently, her daughter had seen her mother injured by a violent animal and was afraid to leave the house. It was a desperate Hail Mary. I dug through the footage again, frame by frame, and found what I was looking for. A single shot of Karen alone, muttering into her phone saying, "I should have brought Kaylee." This would have gone viral faster with a kid in frame. I saved that clip and sent it to Dennis immediately. It was now undeniable. Karen wasn't just lying, she was manufacturing trauma, manipulating the narrative, and treating the court system like a reality TV set. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I'd played fair long enough. It was time to let the evidence speak louder than her theatrics. And if she wanted to turn this into a circus, then I was going to be the one to bring the spotlight. The town had started to buzz in ways I hadn't expected. Word was getting around, not just through the slow burn of gossip, but in louder, more public ways. Someone had leaked Karen's deposition highlights to a local podcast host who thrived on neighborhood drama. It aired on a Friday morning under the episode title, "Horse Nonsense: The Great Ranch Lawsuit," and within hours, people were sharing clips of Karen talking about the dangerous stallion, while footage played of Daisy, my calmest horse, gently sniffing a patch of grass like a sleepy lawnmower. The clip where she claimed my fencing was aesthetic consent got clipped, memed, and remixed into a country song on TikTok. I didn't make it viral, but I wasn't sad to see it happen either. Support started pouring in unexpectedly. A few neighbors who had been distant earlier now dropped by with small gestures. One brought over a bag of feed for the horses. Another, whose daughter I'd once let brush Daisy during a school project, slipped me a handwritten note that said, "We believe you." But the most surprising support came from Mr. Holloway, an elderly Vietnam vet who lived 2 roads over. He had always kept to himself, but now showed up on my porch with a tin of homemade peanut brittle and said, "Son, you ever need someone to testify that this place is clean and safe, I'm your guy. My dog trusts you, and she don't trust anyone." I didn't want a war, but it was clear this was no longer just about clearing my name. It was about reclaiming the truth. Karen, however, wasn't letting up. After her daughter claim fell flat, she pivoted again. This time, she was claiming post-traumatic agoraphobia. According to her latest update, she hadn't left her house in weeks due to crippling fear of open spaces brought on by the incident. She recorded her confession while sitting on a patio chaise lounge under the sun, which was ironic, since her GPS-tagged photo clearly showed she was at a public lake that very day. She deleted it a few hours later, but not before someone screenshotted it and sent it straight to Dennis. Karen's credibility was in freefall. The problem was, she didn't seem to care. She wasn't trying to win a case anymore, she was trying to stay relevant, to stretch the drama long enough that maybe she'd land a media appearance or a book deal. Meanwhile, her supporters, few as they were, began to show cracks. At the next HOA meeting, things turned more hostile than I anticipated. Karen had tried to gather a group of people to publicly demand that I relocate my horses, citing community trauma. She passed around a clipboard for signatures, but barely managed 7 names. Most people rolled their eyes. Others openly laughed when she began to speak. Then, something unexpected happened. Trish, the HOA board member who had always sided with Karen, asked to speak privately after the meeting. She pulled me aside near the refreshment table and sighed like someone who just realized she backed the wrong horse in a very literal way. "I don't like you," she said flatly. "Never have. But I don't like being lied to more." She handed me a printout of Karen's latest fundraising campaign. She was asking people to donate money for her medical recovery and legal defense against a hostile landowner. In the post, she wrote that she was being harassed by ranchers and their dangerous animals, and that any amount would help her continue her journey toward justice. Trish shook her head and said, "She's turning it into a circus. And we're getting dragged into it." I nodded, not needing to say anything. Karen wasn't just losing credibility, she was starting to wear out even her allies. But before I could even enjoy the moment, a new nightmare hit. Karen had hired a videographer. Apparently, she thought a reenactment of the attack would boost her GoFundMe. So she staged a scene outside the ranch boundary using a rented miniature horse dressed up in a child's cowboy costume. She limped into frame, cried on cue, and described the moment when the horse lunged at her without warning. But she made one major mistake. She did it on public land adjacent to my ranch's trail, and halfway through filming, the mini horse got spooked and ran, straight into the road, then through my gate and finally into my barn. Chaos exploded. The tiny horse spooked Daisy, who bumped into a bucket and knocked over a feed bin. Karen ran in after it, completely forgetting she was supposed to be afraid of horses, and tried to coax it out using baby talk. She slipped, landed in a pile of hay, and started crying again. This time, not for the camera, because someone had already turned one off. Her cameraman was too busy apologizing to the motorist, who almost hit the runaway horse. I stood there watching it all unfold like a scene from a sitcom that had jumped the shark. I didn't say a word. I just let my security cameras roll. That footage, too, made it online. It was posted anonymously, certainly not by me, but once it hit Reddit, the comments exploded. People compared her to failed movie villains. Some joked she was trying to sue her way into fame. Others offered to buy t-shirts with my ranch logo on it. One user edited a slow-motion version of her slipping into the hay with epic movie music. Within days, the narrative flipped. No one saw her as a victim anymore. She became a meme, a punchline, and the symbol of self-inflicted drama. But Karen still wasn't done. A few days later, I received an official notice. She was filing an amended complaint accusing me of orchestrating the viral videos to defame her character. That's when Dennis finally said what I'd been thinking for weeks. She's not trying to win. She's trying to drain your spirit. And your wallet. But I think she just gave us the perfect way to end this. With Karen's multiple claims contradicting one another, the deposition footage, social media posts, public behavior, and now even her own supporters jumping ship, Dennis filed a motion to have the entire case dismissed with prejudice. That meant not only would the case be thrown out, but Karen would be barred from filing it again. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we had momentum on our side. In the meantime, I decided to stop letting her dominate the conversation. I reached out to a local equine therapy nonprofit and offered to host a free open house at the ranch. Families showed up, kids got to pet the horses, and I gave short tours explaining how we care for the animals and why boundaries are important not just for safety but respect. One young girl, probably no older than 8, walked up to Daisy and said, "She doesn't look scary. She looks like she needs a hug." And she was right. The open house was a hit. Photos from it started circulating online, contrasting the real ranch environment against the distorted fantasy Karen had tried to sell. People saw the truth for themselves. No yelling. No trauma. Just horses, fresh air, and the quiet dignity of a place that had been unfairly smeared by someone chasing attention. I didn't know what the judge would say yet, but I did know one thing. Karen had tried everything. She'd weaponized sympathy, twisted narratives, and manipulated platforms. But at the end of the day, facts were harder to bend than social media, and reality doesn't care how dramatic your story sounds when it's built on fiction. I was done playing her game. The next chapter would belong to truth, and this time it would be written in court. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a strange, charged calm, like the still air before a thunderstorm. I wasn't nervous, exactly. I'd spent the last several weeks watching Karen's case slowly unravel under the weight of its own lies. But still, walking into that courtroom, past the metal detectors and buzz of low voices, I felt a kind of pressure building inside me. This wasn't just about one woman trespassing onto my land. It was about the fight for something bigger. The truth, my name, my livelihood. And finally, it was time to let the truth speak louder than Karen ever could. The courtroom itself was small and unassuming. Wood-paneled walls, stiff benches, and the faint smell of sanitizer in the air. Karen was already there when I arrived, seated next to her third attorney, a new face named Vance who looked like he had walked straight out of a daytime legal drama. She wore a muted gray suit, no ankle brace today, but her face was a masterclass in victimhood, downcast eyes, tight lips, a slow, deliberate fidgeting with her blouse sleeve like every breath she took was loaded with injustice. I sat behind Dennis, who had 3 large folders in front of him, each one marked with sticky notes and color-coded tabs. If preparation had a scent, it would have been him. Caffeine, leather briefcase, and confidence. The judge entered and the room stood, then sat again in perfect sync. What followed was a series of procedural motions. Dennis opened by requesting the lawsuit be dismissed with prejudice based on overwhelming contradictory evidence, malicious intent, and documented fabrication of injury and trauma. Vance objected, claiming Karen's videos and public statements were protected speech, not evidence of deception. Dennis, ever the calm but lethal professional, began laying out the facts one by one. He referenced Karen's own deposition, where she had stated she hadn't left her house due to post-traumatic anxiety, then played a time-stamped video showing her dancing barefoot by the lake during that exact time period. Then came the surveillance footage again, only now it played alongside her social media captions. On one side of the screen, Karen was climbing my fence in real time. On the other, her post claimed she had entered through an unlocked gate in response to animal cries. It was as if we were watching 2 different realities crash into each other. The judge took notes silently, barely blinking. Karen's attorney tried to redirect, stating that even if she had entered the property uninvited, it was still the rancher's responsibility to ensure animals didn't pose a risk to unknowing citizens. But Dennis countered that argument swiftly, producing Dr. Mendez's report detailing the horse's behavior and safety standards, along with confirmation that the paddock was legally secured with posted signs. He emphasized that Karen had gone through 3 gates, 2 locked, 1 broken by force, and had stepped inside the paddock entirely of her own volition. If that wasn't trespassing, what was? The turning point came when Dennis submitted the most damning clip. It was the offhand moment Karen had whispered into her phone near the fence line, "I should have brought Kaylee." This would have gone viral faster with a kid in frame. Her attorney stammered an objection, but the judge waved him off. He asked to replay the clip. Then, after a long pause, he said flatly, "Let the record show this was prior to the alleged injury." That one sentence shifted the entire tone of the room. You could feel the atmosphere tighten, like the whole courtroom had just seen through the performance. Karen's face cracked. For a split second, the poise slipped. Her eyes widened, her lips twitched, and then came the tears, but this time, they didn't land. The courtroom had seen the rehearsal reel too many times by now. There was no sympathy left to mine. When it was her turn to speak, Karen launched into a final monologue, something between a defense and a confession, dripping with faux sincerity. She said she only wanted to connect with nature, that she felt spiritually drawn to horses, and misjudged the safety of the area due to its welcoming atmosphere. It might have fooled someone in a living room, but not a courtroom stacked with evidence. The judge listened, nodded once, and then looked down at his notes for a long time. Then came the verdict. The judge ruled in our favor, dismissing the lawsuit entirely, with prejudice, stating that Karen's actions represented a willful disregard for property boundaries, a clear fabrication of injury and trauma, and a misuse of the legal system for personal attention and potential financial gain. He didn't stop there. He ordered Karen to pay court costs and issued a public reprimand for abuse of civil litigation channels. Dennis let out the slowest exhale I'd ever heard from him, then shook my hand like we'd just finished climbing a mountain in the middle of a lightning storm. Karen sat frozen. Her lawyer muttered something under his breath and began packing his files. For a moment I expected her to lunge into another speech, to cry, to protest. But instead, she just stared forward, eyes blank, like her entire narrative had finally hit a wall that wouldn't budge. Her moment was over. The aftermath of the ruling spread quickly. Local reporters covered the story not as a scandal but as a lesson. Headlines read "Rancher Vindicated After Bogus Horse Lawsuit," and "Karen's Rodeo of Lies Ends in Legal Defeat." The HLA distanced themselves from her completely, quietly issuing a statement that her behavior did not represent the community's values. Trish resigned from the board a week later. Karen's GoFundMe was shut down after multiple complaints and refund requests, and her social media went dark. I didn't celebrate immediately. It wasn't the kind of victory you toast with champagne. It felt more like the end of a storm, relief, yes, but also exhaustion. My ranch had survived, my name was cleared, but the emotional toll of being dragged through a public smear campaign was still there. I walked out to the barn that evening, just as the sun dipped low behind the hills, and sat next to Daisy, running a brush gently through her mane. She nuzzled my arm like she knew the weight I'd been carrying, and for the first time in weeks I let my shoulders relax. But something unexpected happened that weekend. A local animal rescue group asked if I'd be willing to host a charity event, a horse education day for kids and families, to teach them about safety, respect, and animal behavior. I agreed without hesitation. And what started as a small event turned into a community gathering. Parents brought their children, neighbors brought baked goods, and people toured the ranch with wide eyes and open hearts. One child asked if Daisy was the horse from the Karen story, and then whispered, "She's prettier than I thought." Someone printed shirts with a cartoon horse and the words "Keep Calm" and "Respect the Fence." They sold out in an hour. Karen never showed up again. I heard she moved out of the neighborhood 2 months later, after her house sat on the market longer than expected. Whatever spotlight she had chased had turned into a shadow she couldn't outrun. And as for me, I didn't seek revenge. I didn't need to. The truth had done its job, slow and steady, like the best horses always do. Standing under that open sky, I realized something. Karen thought she could rewrite the story to fit her fantasy. But this ranch, this land, these animals, they don't play by fantasy. They run on truth, respect, and a kind of strength that can't be faked or forced. She trespassed into that world thinking she could bend it to her will. What she didn't understand is, on this ranch, nature doesn't yield to drama, and justice, like a good horse, always finds its footing.